You want to know the truth? I've told this story maybe 100 times, and every single time somebody laughs at the start. They hear the first part and they smile like it's a joke, like it's going to be funny. It is not funny. I was there, I saw it happen, and I'm the one who has to live with the fact that it started with me. A clerk, a nobody, a line of data I signed off on without even reading it twice. So go ahead, laugh now, get it out of your system. Because by the end of this, you won't be laughing. You'll be doing what the rest of us did that day. You'll be praying. Let me back up. My name is Veth. Back then, I was a junior intake officer on Drenok Way Station, which is a fancy way of saying I sat in a little glass booth for 16 hours a day and stamped permits for ships that wanted to dock. I had 4 arms, a bad back, and a supervisor named Kor who hated me for reasons I never understood. Drenok was an Imperial border station, the far rim, the kind of place the Oscaran Imperium built to remind everyone that the Imperium owned this stretch of nothing. We orbited a dead red star. The light through the viewports was always the color of old blood. You got used to it, sort of. It was a loud place, always. Engines, recyclers, the hum of the dampening fields. 40 species crammed into a tin can the size of a small moon. You could smell 6 different kinds of food rotting at any given time. Somebody was always fighting in the lower decks. Somebody was always crying in the upper ones. I tell you all this so you understand. We were not soldiers. Drenok wasn't a war station. We were paperwork and customs and the occasional drunk smuggler. We hadn't had a real incident in 12 years. And then the Brightside docked. I remember it because it was such a stupid little ship. It came in on Bay 9, which was the cheap bay, the one with the broken gravity plate that made everything tilt a little to the left. The Brightside was a human freighter. Old. Patched. One of those ships humans build out of whatever they can find and then somehow keep flying for 40 years out of pure stubbornness. You have to understand, back then humans were new. They'd only had their corridor open to Imperial space for about a generation. Most of us had never met one. We'd heard things, stories. You know how it is. New species shows up, everybody's got an opinion, half of it's nonsense. The thing everybody said about humans was, they're soft, they're small, they get attached to things, they feel too much. The other species in the Concord traded with them, sure, but nobody took them seriously. They didn't have a real fleet. They didn't have territory worth the name. They were scavengers with feelings. That was the joke. Humans feel too much. I want you to remember that joke, because it's the most dangerous thing anybody ever got wrong. So the Brightside docks and the manifest pings my booth, and I look up and there he is. The human. His name was Hollies. I learned that later. At the time he was just individual human male 1, which is how the system listed him. He was older, gray in his fur, they call it hair, and he walked with a limp like an old injury that never set right. He had a face like cracked leather and these small, tired eyes that had clearly seen a lot of bad bays on a lot of bad stations. He came up to my booth and he put both hands flat on the counter, which is a human gesture I didn't understand yet. I do now. It means I'm not a threat, I'm not reaching for anything, I just want to get through this. Docking permit, he said. His translator was cheap, the words came out flat. Resupply, water and protein, 2 days then I'm gone. Easy routine. I started running the manifest. And that's when I saw the second line. Live cargo 1 unit classification, companion animal species, CANISFAMILIARIS. I'd never seen that classification before. Companion animal. I almost flagged it, almost called Kor. Live cargo always meant inspection, always meant fees, always meant a headache. But it was 1 unit, 1 small animal, and Hollies looked so tired and the line behind him was 20 ships deep, and Kor was already glaring at me from across the deck. So I did the thing that started all of it. I waved it through. I stamped the permit, I cleared the bright side, and I said, "Companion animal must remain aboard your vessel at all times. No exceptions. Station regulation." Hollis nodded. "He stays on the ship, always does. He's a good boy." I didn't know what that meant. A good boy. I figured it was a translation glitch. He took his permit. He limped off toward Bay 9. And I forgot about him completely, because 40 more ships needed stamping and my back hurt, and that's just how the days went. That was the morning. By that night the whole station knew the human's name, and within a week, so did the entire Imperium. Here's what I didn't know while I was stamping permits. The animal, the companion animal, the one unit of live cargo, had a name. Bruno. I never saw him properly until the recordings came out later, but I've watched those recordings so many times I could draw him from memory. He was not big, not by Oscaran standards. He came up maybe to a human's knee, brown and black, with ears that stood up and a tail that never stopped moving, and these eyes that were, I don't know how to say it, warm. They were warm. You looked at this creature and something in you just went quiet. He wasn't a weapon. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't anything. He was an old man's dog, that's all. Hollis had hauled freight alone through the dead rim for 30 years, and the only living thing that ever traveled with him was Bruno. I learned later that Hollis had found him as a pup, half-starved, in the cargo hold of a wrecked colony ship he'd been hired to salvage. Everyone aboard had died. Everyone except a small brown animal that crawled out from under a collapsed bulkhead and pressed itself against the first warm thing it found, which happened to be Hollis's boot. He never sold the salvage. He kept the dog. 30 years. The dog was old now too, slow in the back legs, gray around the muzzle, just like his human. Two tired old creatures who'd kept each other alive in the dark for 3 decades. And the Oscaran Imperium was about to make a mistake about him. The kind of mistake an empire only gets to make once. It started with the new commander. His name was Submarshal Tovik, and he transferred to Drenok 2 cycles before all this. Tovik was Oscaran high caste. You could tell from the carriage of his crest and the way he never quite looked at you when he spoke, like meeting your eyes would dirty him. He'd come from the core worlds, a real career officer. And he hated being posted to a custom station on the dead rim. You could see it eating him. A man like that needs to prove something. A man like that is looking for something to prove it on. He found the human. What happened, and I pieced this together from station logs and from people who were there, was this. On the second day, Hollis took Bruno off the ship. I know. Companion animal must remain aboard your vessel at all times. That was the rule. That was the rule I told him myself with my own mouth. But here's the thing nobody in the Imperium understood at the time. The dog was sick. The recyclers on the bright side had failed. That's actually why Hollis stopped at Drenok in the first place, not just for water. The air in the cargo hold had gone foul. The old dog was struggling to breathe. And Hollis, who I think loved that animal more than he loved his own life, was not going to sit in his ship and watch him suffocate. So he carried him. He carried this old dog in his arms down the gangway, looking for the medical deck, looking for clean air, looking for anyone who would help. And he walked right into Submarshal Tovik's inspection sweep. I've watched this part on the recording so many times. You see Hollis come around the corner of the docking concourse. He's got Bruno in his arms, and you can tell the dog is sick. His head's hanging. His sides are heaving. Hollis is moving fast, scanning the signs, trying to read the Oscaran symbols he can't understand. And then you see Tovik's detail. 8 Imperial soldiers in full kit, pulse rifles, black and silver armor, the marshal himself in the center, crest raised, hands behind his back. Tovik holds up one hand. The detail stops. Hollis stops too. There's no sound on the early recording, but you don't need it. You can read it all in the bodies. Tovik points at the animal. Hollis says something. You can see him gesturing, see him pointing back toward the bays. See him cradling the dog tighter and tilting his head in that universal way that means please, he's sick, please. Tovik doesn't care. You see him give an order. 2 soldiers step forward. And Holly's this tired old man with a dying dog in his arms. Holly's backs up. 1 step, 2. He turns his body, putting himself between the soldiers and the animal, shielding it. That's the first thing. He shielded it. Before anything else happened, before anyone raised a voice, his whole body just folded around that dog like it was the only thing in the universe worth protecting. The soldiers grabbed him. I was 3 decks up when the alarm went out. Disturbance, DOCKNG Concourse, security response, all UNITS. Corps told me to stay in my booth. I didn't. I'd never seen a real disturbance, and the rim makes you bored enough to be stupid, so I went to the gallery rail where you could look down on the concourse and I watched. This is the part where people stop laughing when I tell the story. This is where it turns. They had Hollies on the ground, 4 soldiers. They'd pinned him and they were holding his arms behind his back and he was screaming. I'd never heard a human scream before. It's an awful sound. It goes right through you. It doesn't sound like rage, it sounds like grief. And the dog, Bruno, they'd taken him. One of the soldiers had him by the scruff, holding him out at arm's length like he was garbage, like he was contaminated. This sick old animal hanging there with his legs dangling and his sides still heaving. Tovik stood over Hollies, and on the recording with the audio they recovered later, you can hear what he said. He said the human had violated quarantine regulation by removing unscreened biological cargo into a sterile concourse, and that the cargo would be impounded and processed for disposal. Disposal. He didn't even say it cruelly. That's the part that haunts me. He said it like a man reading a parking violation. Bored, procedural. He genuinely did not understand that he was holding a knife to the one thing in the galaxy that this old human would burn down stars to protect. He thought it was cargo. To him, it was a line on a manifest, the same line I'd stamped without reading. And Hollies, pinned to the deck with 4 soldiers on his back, stopped screaming. I remember that, the screaming just stopped, and in the recording you can see his face and it changes. The grief drains out of it, and something else comes in, something cold, something quiet. He stopped fighting. He went still, and he looked up at Tovik, and through his cheap broken translator in a voice flat as a sheet of metal, he said 11 words. He said, "Mister, you have no idea what you just decided to do." And then he laughed, once short like a cough. Nobody on that concourse understood why a beaten old man on the floor would laugh. We found out, we all found out. They put Hollies in a holding cell on the security deck. They put Bruno in a containment unit in the quarantine bay, scheduled for processing in 12 hours. And they let Hollies make 1 transmission. That was regulation. Even a detained foreign national gets 1 outbound message to register his status with his own government. It was a courtesy, a formality. The Imperium gave it without a second thought, the way you toss a coin to a beggar. I was in the comms relay when the message went out because that's where Corps had reassigned me during the lockdown. I watched it route through. It was a short burst, encrypted, aimed at a human relay buoy 4 systems over. I didn't think anything of it. 1 old freighter pilot filing a complaint into the void. Who would even listen? But I saw the message. The decrypt flagged it as low priority and dumped the plaintext to my screen out of habit. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a legal filing. It was 9 words sent to a contact list I didn't recognize, a list of call signs that meant nothing to me at the time. The message said, "They took Bruno, Drenok Station, I'm asking please come." That was it, I'm asking. I didn't understand it then. I thought, what a strange, sad little message. What a small, powerless thing to send. I know now that those call signs weren't random. I know now who was on that contact list. And I know now that I'm asking was not a small thing at all. It was the largest thing a human can do. Because among humans, you don't ask unless you mean it, and when you ask, they come. I'll get to who came. But first I have to tell you about the 12 hours in between. Because that's when the station got strange. That's when I started to feel it, that cold drop in your gut when you realize the ground under you isn't as solid as you thought. It started with the docking logs. About 2 hours after Holly sent his message, ships began arriving at Drenok. Not many at first. One, then two, then a handful. Human ships. Now you have to understand how unusual that was. We got maybe one human freighter a month on the rim, and that was a busy month. To see 2 human transponders ping the approach lanes in the same hour was strange. To see 5 was unheard of. They didn't request docking. That was the first thing that bothered me. They just arrived. They took up holding positions out past the station's defense perimeter, dead silent, transponders broadcasting nothing but a registry number and a single repeated word. I pulled one of the registry transmissions. The repeated word was a human word the translator rendered as standing by. Just that over and over. Standing by, standing by, standing by. I took it to Core. I said, there are human vessels gathering off our perimeter. Core looked at the scope. He counted. There were 11 by then. He shrugged his upper shoulders and said, freighters, probably a convoy passing through. Log it and forget it. But I couldn't forget it, because freighters don't sit dead silent in a defensive screen formation. Freighters dock or freighters pass. These ships were waiting, and the longer I watched, the more of them came. By the 8th hour, there were 40. By the 10th hour, there were over 100. And they still hadn't said a single word except standing by. I went down to the security deck around the 9th hour. I told myself it was to deliver a manifest correction, but the truth is I wanted to see the human. I wanted to understand. The holding cells were quiet, most of them empty. Holly's was in the last one, sitting on the bench with his back against the wall and his hands in his lap, very still. The cell field was up, a faint blue shimmer between us. He looked up when I came in. Those small, tired eyes found me right away. I don't know why I spoke to him. Maybe because I was the one who'd stamped his permit. Maybe I felt I owed him something. I said, "You're animal. The processing is scheduled in 3 hours. I'm sorry. There is nothing I can do." He studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the clerk from the booth." "Yes." "You waved me through. Not an accusation, just a fact." "Yes." He nodded slowly, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "It's not your fault, son. You didn't know. Nobody here knew. That's the whole problem." I asked him what he meant. He leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. And he said, "You ever love something, clerk? Something that can't take care of itself. Something that only has you. Something that die for you and doesn't even know what dying is, just knows that wherever you go, it goes too." I didn't answer. I didn't have an answer. "That's Bruno," he said. 30 years. He pulled me out of the bottle when my wife died. He sat with me through nights I shouldn't have lived through. He's not cargo. He's not an animal. He's the best part of me, sitting in a box in your quarantine bay, scared and sick and waiting for me to come get him. His voice didn't rise. It stayed flat. That same cold flatness from the concourse. "And I'm not coming, because your people put me in a cell." I said again, "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for me." He opened his eyes and looked straight at me, and I felt it then, that cold drop. Be sorry for them. Be sorry for whoever gave that order, because I sent a message, clerk, and they heard it, and they're coming. "The freighters," I said, "the 100 ships standing by." He almost smiled. "Those aren't freighters." I went back up to the comms relay at a run. I pulled the registry data on the gathering ships. Really pulled it this time, ran it deep, past the surface transponders, into the drive signatures. And my stomach dropped through the deck. The freighters had freighter transponders, but freighter transponders are easy to fake. The drive signatures, the actual energy bleed of the engines, the thing you can't hide, were not freighter signatures. They were military. Every single one of them. Warship drives running quiet, masked behind civilian beacons, sitting in a perfect englobement formation around a station that didn't know it was surrounded. They hadn't gathered to dock. They'd gathered to hold the line while more of them came. And they were still coming. I have to tell you about the humans here, about what we learned later. Because none of us on Drenok understood in that moment what we were looking at. The contact list on Holly's message, those weren't friends. Not exactly. They were a network. See, the humans who work the deep rim, the freight haulers and the salvagers and the lonely long route pilots, they've got nothing out there. No navy to protect them. No empire watching their backs. The Imperium never bothered. The conquered never cared. They were alone in the dark, the way Holly's was alone for 30 years. So they made a promise to each other. An old one, unofficial, not written down anywhere. A handshake agreement among 10,000 lonely humans scattered across 1,000 light years of nothing. The promise was simple. If one of us asks, all of us come. It didn't matter who you were. It didn't matter if they'd ever met you. It didn't matter if it was inconvenient or dangerous or insane. If a human out on the rim sent the call, I'm asking, please come, then every human who heard it dropped what they were doing and burned every drop of fuel they had to get there. Because they all knew, every one of them, they all knew that someday it might be them in the cell, them with their whole world sitting in a box, scheduled for disposal. And the only thing standing between a human and the cold indifference of the galaxy was the certainty that they would not be left alone. Most of them weren't soldiers, they were haulers, welders, mechanics, old men and stubborn women who'd retrofitted mining lasers onto cargo ships and called it a weapon. They had no fleet, they had no chain of command. What they had was each other and a promise. And one of their own had just asked. The 100 ships became 300. I watched it happen on the long-range scope, and I watched Kor's face, change from boredom to confusion to something I'd never seen on him before. Fear. He called Submarshal Tovik to the command deck. I was there. I'd attached myself to the comms station, and nobody had the presence of mind to throw me out. So I saw Tovik arrive, crest high, still bored, still annoyed at being dragged away from his evening. Kor showed him the scope. He explained the drive signatures. He explained the formation. He explained that 300 armed vessels were sitting silent off our perimeter and more were arriving every hour. Tovik looked at the scope for a long moment. And then he laughed. He actually laughed. He said, and I'm quoting the command log here, he said, "These are scavengers in welded-together scrap. They have no navy. They have no doctrine. They are here to make noise over an animal, hold the schedule, process the cargo on time. Let them watch." Kor said, "Sir, 300 ships." 300 freighters, Tovik said. "I have 4 cruisers and a station gun that can sterilize a continent. Hold the schedule." And he turned to leave. That's when the comms officer, not me, the real one, said in a small voice, "Sir, new contact." We all looked at the scope. A single transponder had just lit up at the far edge of the system. One ship, but this one wasn't pretending to be a freighter. This one was broadcasting a military identifier. Loud, open, unashamed. A human naval registry that the database flagged in red, a designation none of us had ever seen this far out on the rim. It was a warship, a real one, a human dreadnought by the mass reading, and it was burning hard for Drenok at a velocity that made my crest stand on end. The comms officer read the transponder name aloud, his voice cracking. The ship was called the Old Faithful. And trailing behind it, lighting up one after another like stars switching on, came the rest of its battle group. Tovik stopped laughing. I watched it happen. I watched the exact moment the bored contempt drained out of his face the same way the grief had drained out of Holly's, down on the concourse 12 hours before. Two faces, the same emptying out, the same cold thing rushing in to fill the space. Except on Holly's, the cold thing had been resolved. On Tovik, it was the first taste of being afraid. He stepped back to the scope. He looked at the 300 silent ships. He looked at the dreadnought burning in. He looked at the count, which was still climbing, 400 now, 410, 440. And the comms officer, hands shaking, said, "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from the lead vessel, from the Old Faithful. It's broadcasting on all bands. Open channel. The whole station can hear it. The whole system can hear it." Tovik's voice was very quiet now. "Play it." The officer played it. And the voice that came through every speaker on Drenok Station, in the command deck, in the holding cells, in my little glass booth, in the quarantine bay where a sick old dog lay in a box waiting to be disposed of, was a human voice. Calm, level, almost gentle. It said one thing. It said, "This is the human vessel Old Faithful to Drenok Station. We understand you have one of ours and something that belongs to him. We've come to take them home. You have a choice about how that happens. We'd like you to make the right one. We'll wait." And then the channel went quiet. Not dead, quiet. You could still hear it open. You could hear, faintly in the background of that transmission, the sound of hundreds of human ships sitting in the dark. They weren't firing. They weren't threatening. They weren't even raising their voices. They were just standing by. And somehow, that was the most terrifying thing any of us had ever heard. I looked over at the schedule display, the countdown to Bruno's processing. 2 hours, 11 minutes. Tovik saw it too. I watched him do the math. 450 ships, a dreadnought, a battle group, all of it gathered in silence around a custom station on the dead rim, over an old man and a sick dog, and a clock ticking down toward the one act that would turn all that terrible patience into something else. He had 2 hours and 11 minutes to make the right choice. I want to tell you he made it. I want to tell you that. But I told you at the start, this isn't the funny part. This is the part where the whole station held its breath. This is the part where a high-caste Oscaran sub-marshal, who had never once in his life been wrong about anything that mattered, had to decide whether his pride was worth more than a planet's worth of lives. And I was standing right there when he opened his mouth to give the order. So 2 hours and 11 minutes. I told you I was standing right there when Tovik opened his mouth to give the order. I want you to hold that picture in your head for a second. The command deck. Red light through the viewports like always. 450 ships sitting silent in the dark outside. A dreadnought burning in. A clock ticking down on a sick old dog in a box. And a high-caste Oscaran officer about to make the worst decision of his life. You know what's funny? Not funny like laughing. Funny like the way your throat goes tight. He almost got it right. For about 3 seconds, Tovik almost got it right. I saw it. I saw him look at that count, 450, 460, and I saw something in his eyes that was almost sense. Almost the thought, maybe I release the human. Maybe I hand back the animal. Maybe nobody has to die over this. 3 seconds. Then Kor ruined it. Kor, my own supervisor. The man who hated me for reasons I never understood. Kor leaned in toward the sub-marshal, and he said the stupidest thing anyone has ever said in the history of stupid things. He said, "Sir, if you release the cargo now under threat, every species on the rim will know the Imperium backed down for scavengers, over an animal." And I watched Tovik's spine straighten. That was it. That was the whole thing. Pride. A man who'd been posted to the dead rim, who'd been humiliated by the distance and the dust and the smell of 6 kinds of rotting food, who had finally found something to prove himself on, and now somebody was telling him that to live, he'd have to look weak. He couldn't do it. He physically could not do it. He turned to the weapons officer and he said, "Maintain the processing schedule. Bring the station gun to full charge. If those vessels advance 1 meter past the perimeter, fire." The weapons officer hesitated. I saw it. A young Oscar in lower caste, hands frozen over the console. Tovik said it again, louder, "Charge the gun." And the gun began to charge. Now here's a thing about the Old Faithful I learned afterward, and I think you need it to understand what happened next. The captain of that dreadnought was a woman named Imani Okonkwo, 40 years in human service. She'd come up from the rim herself. She'd been a hauler once, a long time ago, alone in the dark like Holly's. She'd answered the call exactly the way she expected someone would answer it for her one day. And Captain Okonkwo had a rule. The whole human navy out there had a rule, this unofficial thing, this handshake doctrine they'd built for situations exactly like this one. The rule was, you give them every chance. You give them more chances than they deserve. You stay calm and you stay quiet and you let them look at what they're facing for as long as it takes, because killing is easy and you want them to live. You want everyone to live. That's the whole point. But the moment they touch what you came for, the moment they harm the one you came to bring home, the talking is over. Forever. And then you are not patient anymore. She'd been broadcasting, "We'll wait for a reason." She meant it. She would have waited 2 hours. She would have waited 2 days. She did not want a single Oscaran to die. She just needed them to not touch the dog. The station gun hit full charge at the 1 hour 50 mark. You could feel it through the deck, a deep hum that got into your back teeth. The whole station seemed to lean toward it. Outside in the dark, the human ships did not move, did not flinch. They sat there in the gun's firing arc like it wasn't even there. And the open channel was still live, still quiet, still that faint sound of 450 ships breathing in the black. Captain Okonkwo's voice came back on, same calm, same gentle. She said, "Dreadnought Station, your weapon is charged. We see it. We're not moving. We don't want this. I'm going to ask you one more time and then I'm going to stop asking. Release the man. Release the dog. Let them come home, please." "Please." She said please to a charged planet killer. Tovik keyed his own channel, and I will give him this, his voice didn't shake. He had that much. He said, "Human vessel. The Oscaran Imperium does not negotiate with civilian rabble over impounded biological cargo. The cargo will be processed on schedule. If you wish to file a grievance, you may do so through the proper conquered channels. This station is sovereign imperial territory. Stand down or be fired upon." There was a pause. And then Captain Okonkwo said something that I have repeated at the start of this story 100 times, because it's the line that makes people finally stop laughing. She said very softly, "It's not cargo, it's somebody's family. You've got about an hour to understand the difference. I really hope you do." And the channel went quiet again. Down in the holding cell, Holly's heard all of it. They piped the open channel everywhere, remember. He heard his captain's voice. He heard Tovik refuse her. He heard the gun charge. The cell monitor caught what he did. He didn't shout. He didn't celebrate. He didn't slam the walls. He just lowered his head and he said very quietly to no one, "Don't, Imani. Not for me, not for him. Don't make them die over this." That's the thing about him. Even then, even with his whole world in a box and 4 soldiers' bruises on his back, the old man didn't want the Oscarans dead. He wanted Bruno. That's all. He'd have walked off that station alone and grateful if they'd just handed him his dog. He pressed his hand against the cell field, the blue shimmer, and he looked up toward the speaker, toward his captain 400 ships away, and he said, "Just give him back. That's all. Just give him back and nobody has to." The processing alarm went off. I need to slow down here, because this next part happened fast, and I've spent a long time taking it apart in my head, frame by frame, the way you do with the worst moments of your life. The processing schedule had a fail-safe I didn't know about, an automatic one. When the countdown hit its final mark, The quarantine system began the disposal cycle on its own, no operator required. It was designed that way for biohazards. You don't want a frightened tech hesitating over a plague sample. The system just does it. Nobody had canceled the schedule. Tovik had ordered it maintained. So at the 1 hour mark, long before anyone expected, because the system counted from intake, not from the public clock, the disposal cycle started. In the quarantine bay, the containment unit holding Bruno began to seal. The recyclers began to spin up. A sick old dog, who'd been quiet and scared and waiting in the dark for the human who always came for him, started to whimper. And the quarantine bay's internal channel, which fed into the same open broadcast, because everything fed into that broadcast now, carried the sound of it out into the void. The whole system heard a dog cry. 450 human ships heard a dog cry. I have thought many times about what that sound meant to them. To me, it was just an animal. I'm ashamed to say that, but it's true. In that moment, to me, it was just a frightened animal making a frightened sound. To them, it was everything. It was every lonely night in the dark. It was the promise. It was the reason they were out there at all, the thing that was supposed to be impossible to take from one of them while the rest still drew breath. The talking was over. Captain Okonkwo's voice came on the channel one final time, and the calm was gone. It wasn't rage, though. That's what I keep trying to explain to people. It wasn't screaming. It was worse than screaming. It was the flattest, coldest, most absolute thing I have ever heard a living being say. She said, "All units, he's been touched, move." And 450 ships crossed the perimeter at once. Tovik screamed, "Fire." The station gun fired. I felt the whole station buck. The hum that had been in my back teeth became a roar, and a lance of light went out into the dark, and it hit one ship. One. A human vessel had moved into the firing line, on purpose. It put itself between the gun and the fleet, and it took the shot meant for everyone, and it died so the rest could close. I found out later it was an old freighter, a hauler, not even a warship. The pilot was a man named Castellanos who'd been 3 systems away when the call came and burned his engines past redline to make it in time, just to be there, just to keep the promise. He kept it. The gun needed 90 seconds to recharge. It never got them. What came next wasn't a battle. I want to be honest about that because people imagine some grand exchange of fire, ships dueling in the dark. It wasn't. A battle is 2 sides fighting. This was one side arriving. The human warships didn't even fire on the station. That's the part that still makes my crest go cold. They could have. The Old Faithful alone could have cracked Dreadnought open like an egg. They didn't. They went for the 4 Imperial cruisers, and they took them apart with a speed and a coordination that made our Navy look like what it was, 4 bored ships on the dead rim who hadn't run a real drill in 12 years. It was over in under 4 minutes. 4 minutes. 4 Imperial cruisers gone. Not one human ship lost except Castellanos, who chose it. And then 400+ human vessels were holding station around Dreadnought, and every gun on every one of them was pointed at us. And the open channel crackled, and Captain Okonkwo said, in that same flat, cold voice, "Dreadnought Station, your fleet is gone, your gun is down. We are now going to come aboard and retrieve our people. If you interfere, we will stop being gentle. Do you understand me?" The command deck was silent. Tovik stood at the center of it, crestfallen, staring at the scope where his 4 cruisers used to be. The weapons officer was weeping openly. Kor had backed into a corner. And I, the clerk, the nobody, I was standing by the comms station with my 4 hands frozen at my sides, watching an empire find out it had been wrong about everything. Tovik didn't answer the channel. So Captain Okonkwo, very calmly, gave the Imperium something it had never once received in its entire history. A countdown. She said, "I'm going to count to 10. When I finish, If that man and that dog are not on their way to my ship, alive and unharmed, I will assume you've chosen the other path. I'd very much rather you didn't. 1. Nobody moved. 2. Tovik's mouth opened. Nothing came out. 3. And that's when it happened. That's the moment in the title, the moment people don't believe until I tell them I saw it with my own eyes. A high-caste Oscar and sub-marshal, career officer, core world blood, a man who would not look you in the eyes because it would dirty him. That man dropped to his knees on the command deck of his own station. 4. And he begged. I'd never seen an Oscar and beg. We're not built for it, the high caste especially. The crest, the carriage, the whole architecture of the body is designed to look down. They don't bend. He bent. He keyed the channel with a shaking hand and his voice came apart completely and he said, "Stop. Stop the count. Please, please, we'll release them now. Don't, please don't." 5, said Captain Okonkwo, because she had told him she would stop asking, and humans, I have learned, mean what they say. Tovik turned to the weapons officer, to Core, to anyone. "Get the human, get the cargo, get the dog, release them, Geo, run, run." People ran. I ran too. I don't know why I was the one who went for the quarantine bay. Maybe because I knew where it was. Maybe because some part of me had been waiting 12 hours to fix the thing I'd started when I waved that permit through without reading it. I ran for the quarantine bay, while a human captain counted toward the end of the Oscar and Imperium's Pride. 6. The disposal cycle was at 60% when I got there. The containment unit was sealed. The recyclers were spinning, and through the little viewport I could see him, Bruno, pressed into the corner of the box, shaking, his gray muzzle down, his sick old sides heaving, making that sound, that whimper, waiting. 7, came Okonkwo's voice over the bay speakers. I didn't know how to stop the cycle. I'm a clerk. I stamp permits. I stared at the control panel and it was all biohazard protocols and override codes I didn't have, and my 4 hands were shaking too hard to. 8. And then I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the manual release. Every containment unit has one, a physical lever, dead simple, for exactly the moment when the computers have decided to kill something, and a living person decides not to let them. It's heavy. It's stiff. It's meant to be hard to pull by accident. I'm not strong. I want you to know that. I have a bad back and 4 weak arms, and I have never in my life done anything that mattered. I pulled that lever like my own life depended on it. 9. The cycle stopped, the seals blew, the lid came up. And a sick, terrified 30-year-old dog looked up at me, the clerk who'd started all of it, and he didn't bite. He didn't run. He just looked at me with those warm, warm eyes, and I picked him up. I picked him up in my 4 shaking arms, this small, warm, trembling weight, and I ran. I keyed the bay channel and I screamed into it, "I have HIM. I have the dog, he's alive, he's alive." There was a pause on the open channel. And Captain Okonkwo did not say 10. They brought Hollies up from the holding cells at a run. I met him in the docking concourse, the same concourse where it all started, where they'd put him on the ground 12 hours before. He came around the corner between 2 Oscaran guards who were now, suddenly, extremely interested in his comfort, and he saw me. He saw what I was carrying. I have witnessed a lot of things in my life. I have never seen anything like the look on that old human's face. It broke open. The cold thing that had filled it 12 hours ago, the flat hard resolve, it shattered, and what was underneath came pouring out, and his legs nearly went, and he made a sound I can't describe, and he crossed that concourse faster than a limping old man should be able to move. And Bruno, sick as he was, weak as he was, Bruno heard him. The dog's head came up off my arm. His whole body started to move, this frantic full body shaking. His tail going so hard it hurt my arm, and he made a sound back, this high broken cry, and I put him down because I understood, finally, that he wasn't mine to hold. He half ran, half fell across the deck. And the old man dropped to his knees and caught him, and the dog climbed into him, into his chest, into his arms, into his neck, and they held on to each other in the middle of that red-lit concourse, while 450 warships waited silently outside, and an empire knelt, and a clerk stood by crying with all four arms empty. Holly said into the dog's fur over and over, "I came back, I came back, I told you I'd always come back." And the dog just shook and pressed in, and would not let go. They left within the hour. No reparations demanded, no territory taken, no prisoners. Captain Okonkwo never even came aboard. She had what she'd come for, and the humans, I have learned, are strange this way. They will burn down a fleet to save one of their own, and then, the second that one is safe, they simply stop. The fury just switches off. There's no appetite for more. They didn't want the Imperium. They never wanted the Imperium. They wanted the old man and his dog. Before they uncoupled, the open channel crackled one last time. Captain Okonkwo, calm again, gentle again, the cold gone like it had never been. She said, "Drenok Station, we're leaving. You'll keep your station and your lives, and I'd take it as a kindness if you used them to think about what just happened here. We don't want anything from you. We never did. Next time one of ours comes through with something they love, just let them keep it. That's all. That was always all." A pause. Old Faithful out. And 450 ships turned as one and burned for the dark, and took Holly's and Bruno home. They court-martialed Tovik, stripped his cast. Last I heard he's somewhere on a deeper, worse rim than Drenok, in a booth smaller than mine, stamping permits he isn't allowed to ignore. Corps they reassigned. He never spoke to me again, which suited me fine. And the Imperium, the great Oscaran Imperium, the empire that owned this whole stretch of nothing, quietly changed its regulations. There's a new line in the intake code now. I see it every day. Companion animals of non-imperial nationals are not to be impounded, processed, or separated from their owners under any circumstances. No exceptions. It's the only regulation I've ever seen the high caste write out of pure fear. They learned. That's the thing. They finally learned the lesson the rest of the galaxy had been trying to teach them about humans for a generation. It's not that humans are strong. They're not mostly. They're small and soft, and they get attached to things and they feel too much. That's exactly the point. That's the whole thing we got wrong. They feel too much. And when you take the thing they love, when you reach into the one warm spot in a cold and lonely life, and you crush it because it's just a line on a manifest, you don't find out how soft they are. You find out how far they'll come. I still work the booth. Same booth. Bad back, 4 arms, the red light through the viewport like old blood. But I keep something now, on the little shelf where I stamp the permits. It's a flat metal token, the kind human ships drop in their wake as registry markers. One of their ships left it behind when they went. I climbed down to the hull and pried it loose myself, and I keep it where I can see it, every day, every permit, every ship. It's got 9 words etched on it. Human words. The same 9 words Holly sent into the void from a holding cell, when he had nothing left and no reason to believe anyone would answer. It says they took Bruno. Drenok Station, I'm asking, please come. And underneath somebody, I think it was Castellanos, the one who took the shot before he ever left home, somebody had scratched in the reply. The whole reply. The entire promise of an entire people in 3 words. It says, we're already coming. I read it every morning before my first ship. Because I was the clerk, I waved the permit through. I started all of it, and I'll never be free of that. But I'm also the one who pulled the lever. And if you ever find yourself in a little glass booth on the dead rim, bored and tired and ready to wave through one more line you didn't read, I hope you'll remember an old man and a sick dog, and 450 ships that came out of the dark for them. I hope you'll remember that nobody is just cargo. And I hope when it matters, you'll be the one who pulls the lever too.